Montana, 1878. She said it on a cold Thursday morning in November, standing in the doorway of the Millbrook General Store, her arms full of wrapped parcels and her breath making small clouds in the air. He hadn't asked her anything important. He had only said, the way a man says something he means but doesn't think through, that whoever ended up teaching the children of Harlan Creek was going to shape the whole future of this valley. He expected her to smile and move past him. She was always moving, always purposeful, always somewhere to be. Instead, she stopped. She looked at him with an expression he had never seen on her before. Not the competent, composed look she wore like a second dress. Something underneath that, open and careful and certain all at once. "Then I intend to stay," she said quietly. "If the valley will have me." He didn't know, standing there on the frozen porch of the general store with his hat in his hand, that she wasn't talking about the valley at all. Nora Voss was 26 years old when she arrived in Harlan Creek, Montana, on the second Tuesday of September, 1877. She came on the mail coach from Billings with a trunk, 2 boxes of books, and a letter of appointment from the territorial school board that she had read so many times the fold lines had gone soft. She was not what Harlan Creek expected. They had expected someone older, or someone timid, or someone who would last one winter and go back east. What they got was a young woman with steady gray eyes and a practical way of moving through the world that made every task look like something she had been doing comfortably for years. She set up the schoolroom in 3 days, organized the lending of slates from families who had them to families who didn't, and on the first morning of class, stood in front of 14 children ranging from age 5 to age 15 and said, without nervousness, that she was glad to be there and that they were going to do good work together. The children believed her immediately. Adults took a little longer. Her boarding situation was with Margaret Aldrich, a widow of 50 who kept a clean house and strong opinions, and who told Nora directly on the first evening that she would need a warmer coat before December, or she would not survive to teach a second year. Nora bought a warmer coat the following week. Margaret decided she was sensible and extended the arrangement indefinitely. The man who ran the sawmill at the north end of town was named Caleb Marsh. Nora first saw him at the church social the second week of September, when the whole of Harlan Creek turned out to have a look at the new schoolteacher. He was standing at the edge of the gathering near the fence, talking to the blacksmith about something practical, not looking at her with the frank curiosity everyone else was wearing openly. He was tall and quiet and had the particular stillness of someone who does not feel the need to take up more space than he occupies. She noticed him the way you notice a tree that has been standing in the same place for a long time, solid, reliable, part of the landscape. She did not think about it further. She had a schoolroom to run. The first real conversation they had was in October, when a branch came down in the storm that knocked out 2 of the schoolroom's window frames, and Caleb Marsh showed up the next morning with his tools without being asked. He worked for 3 hours replacing the frames while Nora held class on the other side of the room, conducting a reading lesson with 8 children, while a man she barely knew rebuilt the wall behind her. When he finished, she thanked him. He nodded and said the frames had been badly fitted to begin with and would have gone eventually anyway. She said she appreciated him coming. He said it was no trouble. That was the whole of it. But she noticed that the new frames fit perfectly, sealed tight against the November wind that came after, and that he had also, without mentioning it, rehung the door so it closed properly. She had been fighting that door since September. She thought about that, briefly, before she moved on to other things. His name in full was Caleb James Marsh, and he had been running the Harlan Creek sawmill for 4 years. He had come up from Wyoming after his father died and left him a debt and a piece of land he sold to pay it. He had arrived in Harlan Creek with enough money to buy the mill from old Hector Price, who was going blind and ready to be done with it, and had worked it into something worth running. He was 30 years old. He lived alone in the house beside the mill. He cooked for himself adequately, kept the place in order, and had the social life of a man who shows up when it matters and doesn't seek occasion otherwise. People in Harlan Creek liked him in the uncomplicated way. You like someone who does what he says he'll do and never makes things harder than they need to be. He had not been looking for anything. He did not think of himself as lonely the way some men think of themselves as lonely. He had simply organized his life around work and the satisfactions of work, and had stopped expecting anything additional. Nora Voss disrupted this so gradually that he did not notice it happening. It started with the window frames. He had gone because old Margaret Aldrich had mentioned at the feed store that the schoolroom had storm damage, and he had thought, practically, that someone ought to fix it. He had not thought about the teacher particularly, but then he was there, working on the frames in the cold morning air, and on the other side of the room, Nora Voss was conducting a reading lesson in a calm, clear voice that made every child at those rough desks sit up a little straighter. She did not perform it. She simply taught, the way she did everything, with a complete and unself-conscious competence that made watching her feel like watching something done exactly as it should be done. He rehung the door because it was wrong and he was already there. He did not analyze the impulse further, but he thought about it on the walk back to the mill. The door, the way she had thanked him without making it elaborate. The gray eyes, the children sitting up straighter. He went back to work and thought about the mill. He thought about the door again that evening. November came hard and early to Harlan Creek that year. The mountain passes closed 2 weeks ahead of schedule, and the town pulled in around itself the way small towns do in winter, finding reasons to be useful to one another, trading supplies and labor and the warmth of company against the dark. Nora kept school through November, losing only 3 days to weather severe enough that she could not reasonably require children to walk the distance. On those days, she sat at Margaret's kitchen table and prepared lessons, and read from the stack of books she had brought from the East, and thought about her students, and what they needed, and how to give it to them in the time she had. She did not think about Caleb Marsh, except occasionally. He appeared in her days with the regularity of something that belongs to a place, at the general store, where they were sometimes shopping at the same time, and exchanged the pleasant, ordinary words of neighbors. At Sunday services, where he sat 3 rows behind her and she knew without looking. At the Aldrich house once, when Margaret's chimney flashing needed attention and he came to fix it and stayed for the coffee, Margaret pressed on him and sat at the same table where Nora was correcting exercises. They talked that afternoon for an hour about things that did not matter. The winter, the mill, a book she was reading that he had heard of but not read. He asked her what it was about. She told him. He listened with the kind of attention that meant he was actually following, not waiting for his turn to speak. She noticed that. She did not mention it to Margaret, who she suspected was paying close attention to the afternoon from the other side of the kitchen. In December, one of her students, a 10-year-old boy named Henry Price, the grandson of the man Caleb had bought the mill from, began falling behind in his reading. He was not a slow child. He was a child with something at home that was taking up the space where learning should go. Nora found this out by keeping him after class one day and asking him directly what was happening, the way she approached most things, without pretense. His grandfather was dying. He was the one who sat with the old man in the evenings because his parents were exhausted. He was not sleeping. Nora went to see old Hector Price the following afternoon. She brought a book. She read to him for an hour while Henry sat beside them and learned that his grandfather liked stories about the sea, which surprised them both. She went back twice more that week. Caleb heard about this from the blacksmith, who had heard it from Margaret, who had been told by Henry's mother. He stood at his workbench and thought about it for a while without knowing quite what he was thinking about. Then he split an extra cord of wood and had it delivered to the Price house, because they were probably burning more than usual with someone ill inside, and the winter was not getting warmer. He did not send a note with it. When Henry came to school the following Monday, he told Nora that the wood had come from Mr. Marsh. She sat with that information for a moment before she moved on with the lesson. It was the last Thursday of November when he said the thing at the general store. He had not planned it. He was coming in for nails, and she was coming out with parcels, and they met on the porch in the cold air and talked for a few minutes about nothing particular. The way they did now, comfortably, without it needing to be more than it was. She mentioned that 2 of her older students had started teaching the younger ones on the free afternoons, that they had organized this themselves without being asked. He said that was something. She said she thought so too, and then he said it. Not performed, not rehearsed. The way a true thing comes out before judgment can review it. Whoever's teaching the children of this valley is going to shape everything that comes after. Harlan Creek is lucky you stayed. He meant it as honest recognition. He expected her to accept it graciously and move on, the way she accepted everything, without making it into something larger than it was. Instead, she stopped, and she said, quietly, without deflecting, that she intended to stay, if the valley would have her. He stood on the cold porch with the sentence between them, and understood that something had just shifted, though he could not have named exactly what it was or where it was going. Her eyes were steady. She was not flustered. She had said it on purpose. He nodded. Once. She moved past him into the street. He went inside and bought his nails and stood at the counter for a moment longer than the transaction required. He thought about it honestly on the walk back to the mill. He thought about the window frames and the door he had rehung without being asked. He thought about the afternoon at Margaret's table. He thought about Henry Price and the wood and the fact that he had not sent a note with it, which in retrospect told him something about himself that he had not been looking at directly. He stopped walking. She was someone he had been finding reasons to be near without calling it finding reasons. She was someone whose presence in a room changed the quality of the room without her doing anything to make that happen. She was patient and funny and honest, and she taught children to read in a cold schoolroom and read to a dying old man so his grandson could sleep. And she said what she meant without performing it. He stood in the middle of the road in the cold Montana air and felt like a man who has just seen something that had been there the whole time. He was not a man given to dramatic realizations. This one arrived anyway. He walked on. The mill was waiting. December moved slowly and purposefully toward Christmas. Harlan Creek organized itself around the holiday the way small places do, each family contributing something to the whole, the accumulation of effort, making something larger than any single piece. The school put on a reading presentation. The children performed passages they had memorized. Standing in a row at the front of the schoolroom in front of every parent in town, Henry Price read a poem his grandfather had liked. He got through it without stopping. Nora stood at the side of the room and watched her students and let herself feel the satisfaction of it without qualifying it. Old Hector Price had died the week before. Henry had cried once, in the cloakroom, before class, and she had let him and handed him a handkerchief and said nothing, because some things don't need words. Caleb was there. He was in the back of the room with the other adults, and she did not look at him directly during the presentation except once when Henry finished his poem and sat down, and something in the room shifted with collective emotion. She glanced back without meaning to. He was already looking at her. He did not look away. Neither did she, for a moment. Then she returned her attention to the children. After the presentation, there was food and the particular warmth of a room full of people who know each other well, and Caleb made his way to her and said that the children had done something real up there. She said she thought so too. He said Henry had been something. She said Henry had worked harder than anyone. Then he said, carefully, that he would like to walk her home, if she was ready to go. She looked at him for a moment. Margaret was across the room watching them with the elaborate non-attention of someone paying very close attention. "I'd like that," Nora said. They walked through the cold December night, their breath making small clouds, the snow packed and silent under their feet, the sky overhead extraordinary with stars. They talked about the presentation, about the children, about Henry, then about other things, the books she was reading, the work at the mill in winter, what she had expected Montana to be like and what it actually was. "Is it what you wanted?" he asked. She considered it without rushing. "I think I was looking for a place that felt like it needed what I have to offer," she said. "Harlan Creek does." "And is that enough?" he said. "Just the work?" She glanced at him. "I didn't say just the work." He did not answer immediately. They reached the Aldrich house and stood on the porch in the cold. "I'd like to call on you properly," he said. "With Mrs. Aldrich's knowledge and your consent." She looked at him for a long moment, the steady look she had, the one that didn't look away from things. "I've been wondering," she said, "how much longer it was going to take you." He laughed. He hadn't expected to laugh. "Am I that slow?" "You rehung my schoolroom door in October," she said, without being asked, without mentioning it. "I've been thinking about what that meant since October." He was quiet for a moment. "I wanted it to close right," he said. "I know," she said, and the way she said it meant she knew exactly what it was he had wanted to close right. And it was not only the door. "Sunday," he said, "if Mrs. Aldrich agrees." "She'll agree," Nora said. "She's been wanting you to ask since November." She went inside. He stood on the porch for a moment in the cold Montana dark, feeling like a man who had very nearly managed to be too careful for his own good. He called on her Sunday afternoon. Margaret Aldrich made coffee and sat in the next room, with the door partially open and the considered pretense of mending something, and they sat at the kitchen table and talked for 2 hours about things that mattered and things that didn't in roughly equal measure. He told her about Wyoming and the debt and the mill. She told him about Ohio and the school board examination she had passed on her second attempt, which she told him now because the first attempt had made her doubt herself in a way she had not previously known how to doubt herself, and she had decided that was a thing worth saying honestly. He said he respected the second attempt more than he would have respected passing the first time. She looked at him across the table with something that might have been relief. They found, over the weeks that followed, that they had things in common that were not the obvious things. They were both quiet in a way that was not shyness but preference. They both thought more than they spoke and said what they said on purpose. They were both, it turned out, people who paid attention to the small things that other people walked past. He began appearing in her days with an intention that was new, not the accidental regularity of neighbors, but the purposeful regularity of someone who had decided to be present. He came by the school on Friday afternoons, when class was done, and walked her to Margaret's. They went to Sunday services and walked afterward in whatever weather the Montana winter had arranged for them. He brought things sometimes, small, practical things, a length of candle wax for the sticky desk drawer she had mentioned once, a copy of a book she had said she wanted to read but hadn't been able to find, left on the schoolroom step without a note, the way he did things. She started leaving the schoolroom door unlatched on Friday afternoons. He noticed. In January, a letter arrived from the Territorial School Board offering Nora a position in Helena. A larger school, more students, a significantly higher salary, and the kind of institutional backing that could lead somewhere real. The letter was specific and well-worded and represented exactly the kind of opportunity she had been working toward when she had started. She read it at Margaret's table on a Tuesday morning before school and sat with it for a long time. Margaret came in and read the expression on her face before reading the letter and said nothing. She poured coffee and set it down and left the room. Nora went to school and taught the day without mentioning it. Henry Price had a breakthrough with long division that she would have been completely happy about under any other circumstances. She was happy about it anyway, or tried to be. That Friday, Caleb came by the school at the end of the day. The door was unlatched. He came in and found her sitting at her desk with the letter in front of her. He sat down in the chair that had become his chair on Friday afternoons, the one Henry Price's older sister had pulled to the side of the desk one day and never moved back. "Something happened," he said, not a question. She handed him the letter. He read it carefully, the way he read everything. Then he set it down and was quiet for a moment. "That's a serious offer," he said. "It is," she said. "What do you want to do?" She looked at him. "I want to know if there's a reason to stay," she said. "A specific reason, beyond the children and the valley." He looked at her for a long time. The kind of looking that is actually thinking, actually weighing something. "There is," he said. "If you want it to be a reason, I need you to be more specific than that," she said. He was quiet for another moment. Then he said, "Nora, I have been paying attention to you since October. I have been trying to do it carefully because I didn't want to say something before I was sure of it." "I am sure of it." He paused. "I would like to know if you'll let me keep paying attention. For a long time, for as long as you'll let me." She sat across the desk from him in the fading January light and felt something settle in her chest that had been subtly, persistently unsettled since the letter arrived. "That's specific enough," she said. She wrote back to the Territorial School Board the following morning and thanked them for the offer. She said she had committed to Harlan Creek and intended to honor that commitment. She said she hoped they would consider her for future opportunities in the region. She sealed the envelope and did not second-guess it. She did not tell Caleb she had done it. He found out when Margaret mentioned it to him 2 weeks later. having heard it from the postmaster's wife. He stood in the feed store and heard this information, and stood there for a moment after it landed. That evening, he walked to the Aldrich house and knocked on the door. Margaret opened it. "Is Nora home?" he said. "She's in the kitchen," Margaret said, and stepped back from the door with the expression of a woman who had been waiting a long time for this knock. He found Nora at the table with a stack of exercises she was correcting by lamplight. She looked up. "You didn't take the Helena position," he said. "No," she said. "Why didn't you tell me?" She set down her pen. "Because it wasn't about you," she said. "It was about me. I wanted to know that I was staying for my own reasons, not because someone asked me to." He looked at her for a moment. "That's the most sensible thing I've ever heard," he said. She picked up her pen again. "Sit down, Caleb," she said. "I have 12 more exercises to correct, and then we can talk." He sat down. He waited. He did not find it difficult to wait for her. He asked her in February, on a clear, cold afternoon, when the snow had a crust of ice on it that made everything bright and sharp, and the mountains were the kind of blue they only get in winter, hard and beautiful and permanent. He had thought about an occasion, something arranged, something marked. But he was not a man who arranged things for performance, and she was not a woman who wanted performance. What she wanted, he had come to understand, was the real thing, said plainly. So he said it plainly. They were walking back from a visit to the Price family, where Henry had shown them both a letter he had written to a pen pal in Oregon that was the best thing he had written all year. It was a cold walk, but a good one. They were talking about Henry, and then about the spring term, and then about nothing in particular, just walking in the winter air. He stopped. She stopped. He reached into his coat pocket and brought out the ring. It had been his mother's, a simple gold band with a small dark stone that he had carried in his coat for 3 weeks, waiting for a moment that felt like the truth. This one did. He held it out to her in the cold Montana air. "Nora," he said, "I am not a complicated man. I know what I have, and I know what I want, and I know the difference between them. What I want is to spend the rest of my life paying attention to you. I want to be the man who is there when you need something fixed, and there when you don't need anything fixed, and there for all the ordinary days that are most of what a life is." He paused. "I want to build something with you, if you'll have me." She looked at the ring. Then she looked at him. Her eyes were bright. Not from cold. "You rehung my door in October," she said. "And you delivered wood to the Price house in December without sending a note. And you sat in that chair every Friday afternoon. And you waited while I corrected 12 exercises without complaining. And I have known since approximately November that this was where this was going." She paused. "Yes, Caleb." "Absolutely yes." He put his mother's ring on her finger there on the winter road, with the mountains behind them, and the sky very blue above, and the whole of Harlan Creek below them, going about its ordinary business without knowing that something had just been decided that would shape a good deal of what came after. She held out her hand and looked at the ring for a moment. Not at the ring, at what the ring meant. Then she looked up at him, and he kissed her there in the February cold, which was the first time, and the mountains stood where they had always stood, patient and absolute and entirely indifferent to the happiness of 2 people at their feet. They were married in April, when the mud had firmed up enough to make the walk to the church reasonable and the first green was showing on the hills. Margaret Aldrich made Nora's dress. Half of Harlan Creek came, which was the whole of Harlan Creek in practical terms. Nora walked in on Margaret's arm, because her own family was in Ohio and could not make the journey. And Margaret held herself very straight and did not cry until they reached the front of the church, and then cried freely, which caused a ripple of sympathetic feeling through the assembled. Henry Price was there with his mother. He had combed his hair and sat very straight. After the ceremony, he told Nora that his grandfather would have liked this, and she held his face between her hands for a moment and said she thought so too. Caleb said his vows, looking directly at Nora. He said them for her, not for the room. She said hers the same way. Then they were married, and the fiddler played, and everyone ate and danced on the packed earth outside the church until the April evening came down cold, and the stars came out over the mountains, and people went home warm in the particular warmth of a community that has celebrated something real. That night in the house by the mill, Nora stood in the kitchen and saw what he had done over the winter. He had rebuilt the shelving, floor to ceiling on the east wall. The good wood fitted precisely, a full wall of shelving that had not been there when she had seen the house in January. She stood looking at it for a long time. "You built this," she said. "Over the winter," he said. "For the books." "For the books," he said. "I measured them. Some are taller than others. I made the shelves different heights." She turned and looked at him. He had measured her books. He had measured her books and built the shelves to the right heights while she was not there, while she did not know, and had said nothing about it. She crossed the kitchen and held his face between her hands, the way she had held Henry's face, and looked at him directly. "You are a very good man," she said. "I'm trying," he said. "Don't apologize," she said. "You are." She stepped back and looked at the shelves again. The good wood, the different heights, the east wall of a kitchen in a house that was hers now. That is what love looks like when it doesn't say its own name. It measures your books in the winter and builds the shelves to the right height and waits for you to come home and find them. The years after were built from honest work and ordinary days and the particular richness that comes from two people who chose each other clearly and kept choosing. Nora taught the Harlan Creek School for 11 more years before she started the second school, the one 3 miles east that served the families who had been sending their children too far or not at all. She organized this herself, lobbied the school board herself, found the funding herself in the methodical, patient way she found everything. Caleb built the schoolhouse. He did not make a production of it. The mill grew. A second cutting floor. Then a contract with the railroad that changed the business entirely. He handled it the way he handled everything, one careful decision at a time. Talking it over with Nora in the evenings at the kitchen table, where she had opinions that were useful and honest in equal measure, and offered them without softening them past usefulness. Their first child was a girl. They named her Ruth, for no particular reason, except that it suited her from the moment she arrived. She had Caleb's quietness and Nora's precision, a combination that would make her, in time, formidable. Their son came 3 years later, and they named him James, and he had an opinion about everything from the age of 2 onward, which Nora said came from Caleb, and Caleb said came from Nora, and the truth was that it came from both. On a Thursday afternoon in the October of their 8th year, Nora was at the school after hours, alone, marking the end-of-term exercises. The schoolroom had new windows, properly fitted. The door closed without effort. There were twice as many desks as when she had started. Caleb came by, the way he still did on Thursday afternoons, which he had never stopped doing. He came in and sat in the chair that had always been his chair and looked at her across the room and said nothing for a moment. She set down her pen. "What?" she said. "I was thinking," he said, "about that porch at the general store. November 1878. She looked at him. "I remember November 1878. You said you intended to stay," he said. "If the valley would have you." "I did," she said. "You weren't talking about the valley." She smiled. The small, direct smile, the one she had never learned to make smaller or more indirect. "No," she said. "I wasn't." He looked at her across the room for a moment with an expression that was not complicated at all. "I'm glad you stayed," he said. "So am I," she said. "Though for the record, you could have said something a good deal sooner than you did." "I know," he said. "December 1877, she said. "When you sat at Margaret's table. I was already thinking about you then." He was quiet for a moment. "I was thinking about you in October," he said, "when I rehung the door." "Then what took you so long?" "I wanted to be sure," he said. "I wanted to say something when I knew what I meant." She picked up her pen. "That's a better reason than most," she said. "Sit down. I have 8 more exercises." He sat down. He waited. Outside the window, the Montana October was doing what Montana October does, going gold and cold and magnificent all at once, the mountains against the sky the way they had always been, the town below going about the business of a Thursday. Nora Marsh, née Voss, corrected her exercises and felt Caleb's presence on the other side of the room the way you feel a good fire, steadily, and without having to look at it to know it's there. The greatest things in a life are not usually found by looking for them. They arrive on a cold porch in November. They come in through an unlatched door on a Friday afternoon. They show up at a deathbed with a book and sit down and read aloud and don't make a production of it. They measure your books in the winter and build the shelves to the right heights before you've even agreed to come home. Nora had known what she felt long before Caleb said the words. She had carried it quietly, without performance, without bitterness, and when the moment came, she told the truth when she could have deflected. She chose the honest thing in a cold doorway in November. That took more courage than anything else in this story. They both found their way to the same real thing. She got there first. He got there in his own time. And from a Thursday morning in November, on the porch of the Millbrook General Store, everything else followed. Don't wait for the perfect moment. Don't wait until you're certain. Don't wait until you've arranged something that looks like the right occasion. The right occasion is usually already happening. It looks like an ordinary doorway. It looks like a walk in the cold. It looks like sitting with someone while they correct 8 more exercises and not minding the wait at all. Thank you for spending this time with me today. Wherever you are, I'm glad you were here. Sometimes the most important things in our lives aren't hidden somewhere far away, they're right beside us. Quiet and steady, waiting for us to look up from what we're doing. Love doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it rings a door without saying a word. Pay attention to the small, unhurried kindnesses around you. They are usually someone saying, in the only language they know, that they are staying. A small note for you: this story was created and fictionalized by AI, crafted to bring you a moment of warmth and entertainment, and to leave behind a little something worth carrying with you.